Hi there, guys. So there's an article in The Guardian today in which senior Labour figures have told Keir Starmer to stop making mistakes, and that by continually making mistakes, he risks handing the country over to Farage and reform. So let's have a quick look at the article itself here. So it says the Prime Minister faces criticism from Emily Thornberry, who highlights the risk of handing country to Farage. So within the article, and here they're talking about Keir Starmer's latest reshuffle of his cabinet, it says one senior Labour source said the reshuffle was an example of groupthink, adding that whether they win or lose in May, it's all on them, as there's no one now who hasn't signed up to this way of working. It's clear from this reshuffle that they aren't interested in listening. And this is going to reinforce rather than solve their problems. So it says the deputy contest then takes on the form of an intervention and not just filling a vacancy. And then Thornberry told BBC's Laura Kuenssberg over the weekend, domestically, things just don't seem to be working. People hear about the mistakes, and the question is, why are we making these mistakes? And she goes on, we can't afford to keep doing this because we've gone from having the fantastic gift from the British public of a huge majority to now being at 20% in the polls. And in the next election, we'll have the biggest fight of our lives coming against Farage. And the last thing we want to do is go from a position where it was thought we would be in for two terms to handing over our country to Farage and reform. So my response to all this is that yes, he obviously continues to make mistakes, and he has done continually since they were elected. But the notion that he can stop making mistakes is just a category error here. Emily Thornberry and all these other senior figures within the Labour Party are working on the assumption that these mistakes are about delivery, about personnel, about the balance of the cabinet, or about who might replace Angela Rayner. I'm going to suggest that whilst all those issues do contribute to him making repeated errors, they're just symptoms rather than the actual cause. And in my assessment, the real reason he keeps making mistakes is that he and his team have fundamentally misdiagnosed the problems that this country faces, and therefore they're proposing the wrong solutions to the wrong problems, or in some cases, they're not even recognising the actual problems in the first place. There was an interesting interview that Starmer gave to the New Statesman, I think either earlier this year or perhaps late last year, and he was questioned then about his underlying political philosophy. In that interview, after being pressed repeatedly, he made the case, Starmer that is, that he didn't think Britain needed radical change, or indeed any real change in its underlying sort of economic or political structure. And the inference then was that, in his view, through effective delivery and by being competent, he would be able to do enough in this country after being elected so that people would be thankful for him and his Labour government, and that they in turn would then win a follow-up election, maybe in 2029. But I'm going to suggest to Starmer that if you're an ordinary person in this country, you've lived through the longest squeeze in living standards since the Napoleonic War. You've probably not had a meaningful pay rise in years. You've watched in real time as your public services crumble before your eyes, and your mental health has probably suffered as life in this country seems to get harder every year, and as our world shrinks a little bit every year because we can't do the things that we want to do. So when these senior Labour politicians, tell Keir Starmer to stop making mistakes, they neglect to consider ordinary people's lived experience in this country. So, for example, when they implement the scrapping of the winter fuel allowance, when they raise employers' national insurance, or when they propose changes to inheritance tax for farmers, they're still working on the assumption that society is as it was back in 2001, that they can do tax and spend policies to fix our public services and then couple that with a few crackdowns on migration or benefit scroungers, and that the people of this country are going to be grateful for that. But unfortunately for these guys, what they don't seem to understand is that public services have been hollowed out to such an extent that going from really bad services to quite bad services is not actually a win. And they probably also haven't realised that a lot of ordinary people, now need benefits to get by, even when they're in work. And most Labour voters, i.e. their base, don't want disabled people to be targeted, in lots of cases either because they or someone they know might be disabled themselves, and they might need PIP or DLA just to live. And then also on the issue of public services, they seemingly haven't considered that it takes time to make even small improvements, and which people are not going to give them. We've had nothing but jam tomorrow since 2008, and people are absolutely sick of it. So linked to that, people have been absolutely hammered by tax and by stealth taxes for years now under the Tories. And with flatlining wages and an environment of stagnating living standards, people are simply not willing to pay a penny more in tax, and certainly not for the hollowed out public services that we're now subjected to. Emily Thornberry and all those other senior Labour figures, they want to tell Keir Starmer to stop making mistakes, but unfortunately they're not mistakes. In the context of Starmer's worldview, they are normal, sensible policies. And that's because these people haven't caught up with reality. Life in the UK has moved on since 2001, and sadly it's not for the better. This is the key point. Starmer and his team evidently don't have any analysis of what went wrong for the UK after the financial crash, and therefore they don't have any vision for how to fix our economy or how to improve our country, because they don't have that analysis, and they keep making mistakes because the mistakes are sensible policies in a country that existed 20 years ago. And I'll finish with this. Both the people telling Starmer to stop making mistakes and Starmer and his team, they're extremely wealthy, and therefore they're insulated from the main issues that I've discussed here. So I'd suggest that there's absolutely no chance of them even getting to a place where they realise that these are not actually mistakes. So all we're going to see over the coming months and years is just this pattern repeated over and over again. So anyway, thank you for watching, guys. Please let me know in the comments, what do you think? Are these mistakes, or is this something deeper to consider? But thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.